Hey, thanks for joining us today. My name is Pastor Brian, one of the pastors here, and today I'm with my good friend, Pastor Ben Lovelady. Ben's the senior pastor at First Baptist in Silvis. You and I have been friends for, more than 5 years. Yeah. We've been here 10, maybe 7, 8 years, right? So we've known each other, and so welcome to our 4G podcast, where we're focusing on gathering, growing, giving, and going with the gospel. And today we're going to be focused on growing. And I invited Ben to come on. I affectionately refer to you, Ben, as R.C. Lovelady. I'm thinking of R.C. Sproul. Ben is one of the deeper pastors that I know, and you like going deep, don't you?
I do. Yep.
Yeah. You're also very humble. You don't really even want to admit that you're a deep guy, but you are. I see Pastor Ben as a gift to the church with a capital C, certainly a gift to First Baptist Silvis. We're kingdom-minded pastors. You and I connect with 25 other pastors, gospel guys who meet once a month. And as we were thinking about this podcast, I have such high regard for you, Ben, and I've read a lot of what you've written from the book of Genesis. And I haven't read as much in your studies of Exodus, but I've benefited greatly. So those of you here at Edgewood, you've heard me quote Ben. And Ben, I don't know if you know this, but I've quoted you 7 different times in the sermons here. And I know that because I did a search in my Word document, so thank you for allowing me to do that. I ask your permission once in a while, and then other times I think, I don't have to ask you, do I?
No. Okay. And let me hijack this a little bit, too. I just want to say what a blessing your pastor, those of you from Edgewood listening, has been to my life, to Becky's life, my wife, and you and Beth have been just a gift from God to us through different seasons in life and ministry, and we're just profoundly grateful.
Well, we're partners in the gospel. Ben, I think I met somebody in your church at Panera, and then we were at a ministry event together. We think it was Pregnancy Resources. Both of our churches support that life-affirming ministry, and then we've just stayed connected since then. But tell us a little bit about yourself, Ben. Tell us about your family, your beautiful bride, how long you've been at First Baptist Silvis.
Yeah, so we, Becky and I have 6 kids, age from 15, almost 16 to 4.
You're living out that mandate, aren't you?
That's right.
Genesis.
That's right. And we've been serving at First Baptist for 22 years now. So,
but you've been there longer than that, haven't you?
Yeah, so I grew up a large portion of my life there as well. We started serving with the youth, and now in the last 10 or so years, main teaching pastor.
Okay, excellent. Ben, one of the quotes I looked up, and I'm going to read it to you. I was preaching through Genesis, but in my preaching through Genesis, I'm going at hyper speed compared to you, right? We were just talking, Ben spent 3 years preaching through Genesis and 3 years preaching through Exodus, and your insight is profound to me. Here's a sample. Was Adam created to be hidden? Could it be that even in his boldness, there was an element where God created him to be enveloped by something greater? Yet when Adam sinned, like a hermit crab that has lost its shell, he lost his strength and security and was now running scared, looking for alternate cover other than God, which is what people do today, right? And worse, he runs for cover apart from God's glory, among the very trees he was commissioned to protect. I love this, Ben. Enter Christ. He is our hiding place. Effectively, he whispers to Adam, directing him to the proper tree, the cross, behind which to hide. Jesus hides us in himself before the Father, and we are safe. He's absorbed our disqualifying sin, being distanced from the Father himself, so we might come close, from hiding to hidden. So Ben, let me ask. It's a question. When you come up with these things, what hits me is you're doing a lot of meditating on that passage, aren't you? Is that so? Walk me through the process of your study and your meditation of a passage.
Yeah, I mean the cue is from God to do that, and that's, I think, what initially hit me. One of the things I wanted to share is that the way the Bible is written, the way God gave us His Word, in the Hebrew Scriptures, which is the way it was for centuries before our English Bible, changed the order of the books. Same books, just different order. But in the Hebrew Bible, the one Jesus would have read and heard, it had in the Old Testament, only Old Testament at that time, would have been the Torah, and then, which is the first 5 books of the Bible.
Also called the Pentateuch.
Pentateuch, yep. And then it would have went into what's called the Nevi'im, which is the prophets, and the first book of the Nevi'im is Joshua, and then it would have ended with the writings, and the first book of the writings is Psalms. And so when you look at that, you have the Torah, first 5 books, and then Joshua starts. And right at the beginning of Joshua's told to meditate on the law day and night.
Mm-hmm. To be successful.
Yes. And then you finish the Nevi'im and you go into the writings. First book of the writings is Psalms. And in the very first chapter, it says to meditate on the law day and night. And so here's a question I love throwing out at people, that if you finish the law and the very first thing you hear in the next portion of scriptures is meditate on the law day and night, and then you finish that cluster of scriptures and you get into the writings, and the very first chapter says meditate on the law day and night, the question is why were those 2 portions even written? If they're both telling you, hey, meditate on the law day and night.
So go back. Go back to the law.
A good question for each of those clusters of writers is, well, why did you write your books then, if we're supposed to hang out there?
Okay.
Right? And I think the only proper answer to that is a true answer, is these books are meditating on the law.
Yeah, they are, right?
Right. So take the book of Psalms, for instance. The book of Psalms is one book of 5 books.
Right.
Which is just like the law, which is one book of 5 books. Right? And so the law...
This is why I wanted you to come on, man. Just keep going.
It's tipping its hat to, we are the Holy Spirit's meditation on the first 5 books of the Bible.
Okay.
That's what we are. And so then you've got like the longest psalm, Psalm 119, is just a straight up, thorough meditation on the law.
Doesn't every verse contain a synonym for the law? Or precept, or almost everyone?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar, but I think you're onto something. I think I've heard that before. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, Psalm 119 says, the law of your mouth is better to me than thousands of gold and silver pieces. And you read verse like that, and you just have to simply ask, is God boring? Like, is that true? Like, is he speaking truth, or is that just hyperbole? And that's a question that I think everybody needs to answer. And as I started studying through Genesis, it's not as though I intentionally meditated on it. It grabbed me and pulled me in.
Yeah.
I'm wearing a pair of boots right now that I was in a Starbucks drive-thru one time, and I saw a guy walk through with a hat that I really loved. But I was kind of nervous about asking him where he got it. I didn't know him from Adam,
Yeah.
And then I went home and I saw a logo on it, and I looked it up, and I couldn't find it anywhere. And I was like, I should have just asked him.
Right.
So I'm in upstate New York one time, and we're getting ice cream on vacation, and I go to sit down at the table, and I see this guy wearing this pair of boots right now. And I said, I'm not doing the hat mistake again.
Okay.
Right? And so I walk up to the table, and I'm like, hey, he's sitting with all his friends. I'm like, I'm sorry to interrupt. I go, can I ask you where you got those boots? And all his friends go, "Oh my goodness."
Because he's going to tell a story?
Yes. Yeah. Because he won't shut up about those boots.
Right.
He loves these boots. And he went on the third pair. I absolutely love them, blah, 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 blah. And those boots were a bit of a risk he took that he can't stop talking about.
Yep.
And the law for me
And now you're wearing those boots?
Yeah, I'm wearing them, yeah. And ready to buy a new pair. Yeah.
You're waiting for somebody to come up and ask you.
Yeah,
about
nobody
them,
at this point.
No
Nobody
one's
at this
asked you
point.
yet?
No.
Well, they are asking you about the Torah. So.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It was just a dabble. It was just me walking. I read a quote by Lewis today that says, with God, a lot of us kind of like approach him like we approach the ocean. Just we go into our knees, but we're a little skittish about, going way deep. And he said that's how we can approach God. We don't want to get lost in it. And that.
So we hold back.
So we're timid with it. And the law is something that seems just intense. A lot of read through the year and read through the Bible in a year, stall out in Leviticus and stuff like that.
Or we think in our mind the law is boring, or it's don't do this, don't do that, and we forget what the law is reflecting, right? Or
yes, yeah. In preparing for this, I was thinking today, the New Testament criticizes those coming out of the Old Testament in regard to the law, and he criticizes them. He kind of like puts the law in its place, and he says it's elementary, it's a tutor, it's a guardian, it's a shadow, and the reason he had to put it in its frame is because they wouldn't graduate from it into Christ.
Right. They were holding on to it.
They were holding on to it.
It's meant to be a school teacher to help them graduate. Okay.
Yes, and I have kind of a inverse criticism of today's culture, in that whereas the New Testament authors sort of put the law in its place, I'm from like being like too big in a sense, and he's like, no, it's a school teacher. Christ is the big thing.
Right, where Christ got to what's the nature, he distilled it down to 2 commandments, right? But they were all up in all these laws and rules and adding others. Okay, keep going.
And my criticism of today's evangelical culture is that they are allowing the pendulum to swing to the other direction, in that they're not considering the law as elementary school. They're considering the Gospels as elementary school, or the New Testament, when in God's mind is, I gave you my book this way for a reason.
Yeah.
Like, this is where you're trained. This is the backdrop that I want my son to walk on the stage of the play. It is the backdrop. It's the scenery. I was mentioning before we started, every map has a legend or a key. The law is the key that has all the symbols that will help you navigate the rest of the map. I think that, for those that like to, my younger brother loves to smoke meat, and the law I've come to see is like a smoker for meat, that if you spend the right amount of time in the law, once you get, the rest of the Bible will fall off the bone.
Whoa, that's good. It's a good analogy, because a smoker takes time.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And it's just kind of steady too.
Yeah.
Steady and time, just let it go, marinate in it. Okay.
Yeah.
So that out of that then, Ben, some insights like this come, where you're literally meditating, but it's like it's gripping you, and then your mind, like on the second paragraph, where you're like, enter Christ.
Yeah.
He is our hiding place, and Adam is running away, and God's like, where are you?
Yeah.
And I just love how you worded that.
Yeah, it's just easy to think God's boring.
It's
easy to
Why do we
think
do
that
that?
God is like your grandpa that you kind of regret asking a question sometimes, because he won't stop talking about the answer. Like, and your head starts to spin, and that's what we think. So then we got to ask questions, like when the psalmist writes this, that it's worth more to him than thousands of pieces of gold and silver. is he speaking truthfully, like truly truthfully, like, or is he someone we wouldn't want to hang out with? Was that guy a guy like us that has interests and likes watching shows and likes watching games and doing all this stuff? Could we ever get to the point where we say that? And my answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah.
When Jesus opens up the minds of those on the road to Emmaus and the disciples, and it says, did our hearts not burn within us when he did it? What makes your heart, I would ask, burn within you? Like, blow your mind. You wake up at night and you're thinking about it. You're reading your Bible and you just sit back and be like, could that really have been what he meant? Like, because we all love art. And we all love art to one degree or another. And if you don't love art, you need to start loving art, because that's how God made us. And we need to love art. And every good piece of art has layers. You listen to a song, if you get the whole song the first time you listen to it, every metaphor, everything, you kind of move on.
Yeah.
But if you're listening to a song for the 100th time and all of a sudden something the artist said is like, oh my goodness,
I missed that.
That
before.
That's good art, and that's the way the Bible is written. Paul says Christ is the mystery hidden in the plain sight of the Old Testament, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah.
So, it's legit. Paul was just like us. He just was like us. And he was just blown away at the beauty and majesty of Christ hidden in the Old Testament.
Wow. Let me serve up a question, Ben. I don't think you know that I'm going to ask this, but you'll be able to handle this well. Some time ago, a popular pastor and Christian author made this unsettling appeal to church leaders. Would you consider, he's talking to pastors, would you consider unhitching your teaching of what it means to follow Jesus from all things Old Covenant? He believes this is necessary because, quote, when it comes to stumbling blocks to faith, the Old Testament is right up there at the top of the list. He goes further. When people struggle to believe, quote, the Old Testament is usually the culprit. All right, let loose, Ben. What do you say to that?
Yeah, so, one of the best communicators I've ever heard, I think, is the guy that said that. And there have been others, that were some of the best teachers, best communicators I've ever personally listened to. And they miss it. It's such an offense. It's such an offense to God.
It is offensive.
To say you did it wrong.
Yeah.
To the degree that we neglect the Old Testament, we neglect God's way of imbibing Christ. And so to the degree that we cheapen or get rid of the Old Testament, we cheapen Christ. And the thing that blows my mind is I've listened to guys like that, and they would love this. They would love, the way they talk and teach. I'm like, guys, you could teach what I'm teaching way better than me. Like, you're so gifted at it. And this would really blow your mind. I wrote the guy.
But they write off. Yeah, you did write him.
Yeah.
But they write off the Old Testament, so they're not waiting in these waters. So tell me about that. You wrote this guy, and we're not using his name on purpose. But tell me about that. What led you to write? And do you remember what you said?
Yeah. Well, it was in terms of he was saying essentially the New Testament authors. Their focus is primarily highlighting the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and he says, so that's where we want to pitch our tent, so to speak. Is we're gonna teach the resurrection of Jesus, and I just said how much I've appreciated his previous ministry, and maybe what I've heard and the clips I've heard and what I've read aren't giving a full picture of what he actually said. I said,
so you gave him some grace.
Yeah, because you never know, and.
Yeah.
And so, but then I just went on to say, in terms of the resurrection being the focal point of the New Testament authors, I don't disagree, but consider how they say it. That I delivered to you of first importance that Christ died and rose again in accordance with the Scriptures.
And he's referring to the Old Testament.
Yes. And so the mind-blowing nature of what happened with Jesus isn't just that he died and rose again. It's that he did it in accordance with the Scriptures in such a way that the beauty, in thinking through the arguments for the existence of God, I feel like one that's really missing, that's huge, is simply just the beauty of the Scriptures and how they portray Christ for all of his luster in ways that make your heart burn within you, So if you're reading the Old Testament and your heart's not burning, you're reading it wrong. That's the short takeaway. Like, it is truly magisterial, the way he does it. And, and this is one thing I like to throw out there when talking to people about the law. They read the law, their eyes cross, they think poor thoughts about God and his planning, and they move on. And here's what I want to say to them. Jesus was the exact same way. He's the exact same way as his Father in the law. What does he say? I think it's in John 6. He says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no part in me. And it says that he lost many disciples that day.
They went away because the saying was too hard.
Too hard, right? And it would have been so easy for Jesus to be like, oh, okay, time out. What I'm really getting at is that someday,
soften it a little.
Yeah, you're all going to eat little morsels of bread and drink little cups of wine or juice, and it's kind of looks like blood, and like this is kind of what I'm inching at. Sorry, I was a little bit creative, okay? Like, let's step it back. He just let everybody go.
Yeah. Or the rich young ruler.
Right.
He went away sad, but Jesus didn't chase him.
Right.
Right, because he was calling him to full commitment.
Right. So when we look at the Old Testament, I think there are some seemingly bizarre things in the Old Testament that God is letting people just say, he's an idiot, forget this. And God's like, all right, you're missing out, because the beauty of communion versus eat flesh and drink blood is amazing. Yeah. Like how that transition.
It's rooted in the Passover, right?
Yeah, right. And that itself, right. So yeah, I think we need to give these guys a chance in what they say about the law, that they could be just like you, just like me,
Wow. And they're pointing to the grandeur of God, right? And the glory of God, the bigness of God, and back to the evangelical culture, sometimes we make him our friend. Oh, he'll understand. He'll forgive me. And we forget, like, that's one thing, the law, when I'm reading the law, just this sense of God's holiness. This is what I demand, right? He's not softening it. Anyway, back to this pastor who made this statement.
Yeah.
It was just recently then, he softened his views of homosexuality, right? And all of that. Well, that's an outflow of unhitching from the Old Testament.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah,
then you
absolutely.
soften on some of the teaching about sexuality and holiness and about biblical marriage.
Yeah, and we start forming God in our own image, and it's all rooted. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil was forever to me a little bit fairy tale-ish. Like what exactly was that, and that kind of thing. Almost like Aesop's fables. Like what is this about? And in teaching through Genesis, I was blown away to understand that, in Genesis 1, we meet the determiner of good. 7 times he says it was good or very good, right? So when you're introduced, so we need to read Genesis 2 as connected to Genesis 1. Mm-hmm. So God is the one who determines that which is good. He's also the one that determines what's not good, in that it's not good that man should be alone. And then Eve is the answer to that problem. Yep. Okay, so like for any guy and girl who've experienced, love and romance and whatever, God's answer to not good is that. So he's really good at good and fixing not good.
Yeah.
We love marriage. We love sexual intimacy. We love all that goes with it.
So why shouldn't we follow it?
Right.
Right.
And then you're introduced to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the astute reader is meant to say, oh, I know that guy. He's God. Like, he's the one that determines what's good. We've just seen him do it 7 times.
Yeah.
He determines what's not good, and he's got a really good fix to what's not good. So I'm going to avoid that tree to let him keep making those decisions.
Right.
So to avoid the tree was to say, God, you keep deciding what's good, and you keep deciding what's not good. You write the dictionary on good and evil. Don't let us tangle with it. And then when Eve goes to eat from the tree, it's the first time someone other than God is seeing and determining what's good. She saw that it was good, which has only been God up to this point. And he saw that it was good, saw that it was good. So when she does it, everyone's like, no, let him keep doing that, not you. Don't do that. But she is now the determiner of what's good and what's not good. They eat, and then sin results. And we live in a culture right now that's it. It's all we do is eat from the tree. Our space is
my choice, my body, right? It's I want to do what my truth. You do you, I'll do me, right? That goes back to Eve.
Yes. And death and chaos ensue when we are the determiners of good and evil, So yeah, that's the deal. Like, I was just meeting with a dear friend that has abandoned the faith, and we're talking philosophy and such, and essentially Proverbs says it, and it's founded in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Mm-hmm. So every other belief system or every other philosophical system doesn't start with the fear of the Lord as the beginning of knowledge. They begin with me as the beginning of knowledge. They start here instead of with the fear of the Lord.
Putting me at the center.
Right. And they're in the captain's chair. And as a result, death and chaos end up ensuing, just like it did in the garden,
Ben, share a couple more nuggets from your study.
I had jotted down a couple things. So, one thing that I'm encountering this week in Colossians is circumcision. Circumcision, uncomfortable topic, very odd. I read an article recently that said we really can't understand God's rationale for circumcision unless you go outside the Bible to extra biblical resources. And there is some helpful thoughts out there in Egyptian and how they viewed circumcision and stuff like that. But we got to assume and read the Bible with faith that God just didn't give us some bizarre ritual.
Weird thing.
Yeah. Like, how are we supposed to make sense of this, And so hang with me. Okay. So here's the idea. Start back in Genesis, that there is a pattern developing where God's people seek to pursue something in their own strength that he's already given.
They already have
it. But they try to pursue it. It's crazy, but let me walk through some examples, okay? Adam and Eve are made in the image of God, and they pursue being like God by eating from the fruit of the tree.
Yeah.
They're already made in God's image, but they pursue it.
Yeah, they're image bearers.
Yes, but they pursue it. So Noah, God establishes rest. Lamech, Noah's father, says, I'm going to establish rest through Noah. He names him essentially rest. Noah's sounds just like rest. It's a word for rest. And so God's seeking to establish rest through Noah. Noah plants a vineyard, gets drunk, and falls asleep. So he establishes his rest his way. Okay. He pursues rest, but it's already been given. God established rest through the flood. Okay, so here's another example. Abraham has been promised a son. It's going to come. Abraham pursues what God's already promised to give through Hagar. Okay?
He went outside what he should have.
Right. And he pursues that which has already been given. Jacob had already been told through, Rebekah had been told, the older will serve the younger. Esau will serve Jacob. But Jacob pursues that which has already been given, according to God's promise, his own way with deceiving Isaac. Okay? So Just take those instances, all right?
Yep.
And in every one of those instances, when God's people pursue that which he has already given or promised to give, their flesh or some sort of flesh is exposed. So think
All
through
right.
each one of those examples. Adam and Eve pursue being like God. First thing they notice is their nakedness.
Yep.
Noah pursues rest his way, exposes his nakedness, his flesh. Abraham pursues God's son his own way by sleeping with Hagar.
Yep.
Nakedness is exposed. Jacob pursues the promise his way, and flesh is exposed through goat skin being on him, right? Okay, so every time God's people pursue flesh their way, or pursue God's promise their way, they expose flesh. Okay, so Genesis 15, God promised Abraham. He does a covenant. You know, it's basically like in that day going to our lawyer's office and saying, "Let's sign papers, so I know you're giving me your house."
But a little bit more, right? It's a cutting of the covenant.
Yeah, it's intense.
Yeah.
Right. So he does that. All right, and then and he puts Abraham to sleep. He has no contribution. God's going to do it all. He walks through by himself. Go to sleep. Then in Genesis 17,
Listener, hang in there. This is going to go a deep place.
Yes.
I can see it.
So then in Genesis 17, he tells him to get circumcised. So Genesis 15, he says, Abram, I'm going to do it all.
Yep.
Go to sleep.
Yep.
You contribute nothing. I'm going to do it all. Go to sleep. Genesis 17, he says, oh, Abraham, you got to get circumcised. So was circumcised a work? Genesis 15, God just said, I'm going to do it all.
No, he didn't do the work in 15.
Right. He's sleeping, right? So why does he have him get circumcised in Genesis 17? The answer is Genesis 16. Abraham tried to pursue in his own way that which God had already covenanted to give. So God says, take the organ that you tried to pursue, what I'm already going to give, and cut the flesh off of it. God's very crass. Like he doesn't mind. He's not a junior hire.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't mind going those places.
It's kind of brutal.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's like, this is the organ that you used to
Yep.
try to get the promise that I was already going to give. So I want you to cut the skin off that organ, cut the flesh, because you're living according to you, your muscles, your mind, your will. You're trying to get what I gave. Okay? Now here's where it gets bonkers. Okay? So circumcision was God's way to say to every Israelite, go to sleep, rest, don't work. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this for you. Trust me. Trust my provision.
And this is a sign.
And this is a sign that you're not to rely on yourself, okay? You get to the New Testament, and circumcision itself, which was a sign to say don't work,
Became a work.
became a work.
Yes.
So we are so bent on us trying to procure that which God has already given that we take the very exercise he gave us as a reminder. Hey, slap the forehead. Don't work. I'm going to give it to you. Just chill out. Have peace. Be tranquil. Relax. Trust me. Live by faith. And we take the very method he gave us to have us chill out, and we make that method a work. It's
A work by which they judge others.
and judge others, right?
I'm in Ephesians 2 this weekend,
Yes.
and they refer to the uncircumcision, which is a derogatory term for Gentiles, right?
Yes.
And they're viewing we're circumcised,
Yeah.
we're good to go,
Right.
which they're trusting in their works.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Paul's like, it's all Jesus,
Right.
right? It's for both. There is no circumcision or uncircumcision
Yeah.
in Christ. We're all one.
It would be like someone going to Alcoholics Anonymous and getting medallions, okay, for sobriety, and welding those medallions into a flask to get trashed. They're taking the very thing
That signifies
that's helping.
Yep.
It's meant to help, and getting sloshed with it. That's the equivalent of what happens with circumcision. And it just testifies to how easily we slip into a works mindset versus a faith.
It's like we default to that.
Yes.
And we like push back from trusting that God's got this, that he's made a way and he's provided. And I think of Ephesians 1, we've been blessed with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places. And yet we're like, God, bless me. God, when are you going to do something? And God's like, look at all I've done.
Yeah.
And what he's done on the cross. And
Yeah.
man, listener, you're enjoying this, aren't you? So, Ben, you're not only wading in deep waters. I love how you bring in illustrations, like with the medallions, the chips. I think they call those in Celebrate Recovery. And man, Ben, I want to just interject something here. You're working on a devotional with some of these gems. Give us an update. How could we get a hold of some of your writings? What's this project look like? And if somebody's like, man, I want to do a deep dive, but I need a tool. I need some help. What would you suggest?
Yeah. So the work is slow going, but it's a 5-day year-long devotional. So it'd be 260 devotionals just in the book of Genesis. The little tagline that I'm trying to say is 1 year in Genesis for a life in the Bible, because
That's good.
if you get Genesis right, the rest of the Bible really unearths itself for you. But yeah, so I'm around 200 in the devotionals, and yeah, it'll be a while. I'm a slow worker on it, but I meet once a week with some young men at church and write a chapter a week, and they review it and give me feedback, and it's been a really cool exercise for us. But in the meantime, resources that have been unbelievable for me is a place called Theopolis Institute. They have a Twitter account, Facebook. Theopolis. They have an app, Theopolis app. You do have to pay for the app, but it's filled with lectures of James Jordan, Peter Lightheart, Alistair Roberts. These guys have just been, you get into these waters and you look around and there's not a lot of other people out there. And these guys have been like a lifeboat for me.
And Ben, what I would say, I've not read those guys, but what I like about your approach is you're a pastor. So you're thinking hard, how do I take these deep truths and apply them to the guy who's working on the line at Deer, or for the school teacher, or for the high schooler? And so I think you have a real ability to communicate deep truth. And you and I have talked since you started this project, and I'm always like, Ben, is there a way you can get some of this out earlier?
Yeah, I felt like you were pushing me just right now.
Yeah, I'm probably putting some more pressure on. Can you release 50 of them now? But I get why you want to put this into a volume. But I just you're a gift to the church, Ben, and to the kingdom. And when I preach through Genesis 1 through 3 here, you sent me a lot of what you've done, and I've read a lot of that. And so thank you so much for that.
Pleasure.
So we're going to wrap up in a couple minutes, but I just sense you need to share one more nugget with us.
All right, let's take another super odd thing, okay? And this is a little bit shorter, and it's a little dark, so I hate to end on a dark thing like this. But, one of the things you read in the Old Testament is it's 3 times in the law, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk, and you kind of understand that. It's kind of a grotesque thought.
Right.
Yeah. But is that it? Like even my wife Becky was telling me she saw a video of some Jewish girls that they won't eat, because of that law, they won't eat meat with cheese at the same time.
Dairy, okay.
Yeah, so they go a little beyond what the law says, But what's interesting about that law...
That wouldn't work for me, man. I'm from Wisconsin.
It's hard.
It's hard, man.
I heard that and I was like,
it'd be like a brat with cheese.
Right. So, yeah, to seek to understand it, essentially, in each of the 3 instances where that law shows up, it's put next to giving your first fruits back to the Lord, or giving your tithe back to the Lord in the Old Testament context and frame of mind. And And here, so you have to grapple with, why did God put that there? It's seemingly bizarre, and God loves this.
But he said it 3 times.
Yes, and he always puts it in the context next to tithes and such. And so God wants you, he's kind of a dad that doesn't tell you the answer. Proverbs says it's the glory of the Lord to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to seek the matter out.
Okay.
So God is the type God that taps you and he's like, what do you think? Why did I put that there? That's what he wants.
Yep.
He wants you to.
Which you do as a dad, don't you, with your kids?
I hope.
Yeah.
I'm more of a, here's what's wrong.
That's right. Fix this.
He's teaching me to be a better dad. But so you got to consider why. And I think here's the theological import of why he says that 3 times and always puts it next to the tithes. I think what he's saying to Israel is, don't allow the fat, the blessing that I'm giving you, aka the milk, don't allow the blessing to eclipse who I am and kill your children. Because if you allow the blessing I'm going to heap on you to obscure me, because you're going to become in love with the blessing, all the fat, all the milk, the nourishment that I'm just going to heap it on you. If you allow that to obscure me, your children will suffer.
Well, we see that in our culture, don't we?
Yes, and you see it in Israel. Because Israel allows that very thing. And as Israel is being sieged, a mom in 2 Kings 6 boils her kid and eats them. It's horrendous.
It's chilling.
But what God is seeking to demonstrate is, if you allow my blessing to obscure my person, your children will be the sufferers for that. And so he's giving Israel this law to say, you're going to be blinded by all the beauty I give you, but you can't miss me in all of it. And your kids will suffer for it if you do. And tragically, they do, So that's just another thing that we read it and it's easy to move on and just think it's this. But God always is deeper. He's just always deeper. It's gold, it's treasure. And where's that? It's hidden.
It's a nugget. You got to go after it.
You're right.
Oh, man. Ben, thanks for spending this time with us. So beneficial. And that's a good nugget right there. So don't skim on the surface, believer. Read, but then take the time to go down below. Meditate on what you read. Ask questions of the text. Why is this in here?
Yeah.
Why is that there? Why is this word repeated, or that what you just said 3 different times? It's got to be significant.
Yeah.
Right? So keep growing, keep living on mission for the glory of God as you gather with God's people. If you're looking for a church, I recommend First Baptist Silvis. I have recommended your church to people, and if you're not giving of what God has given to you, why not? Start serving, start giving what God has given, and take the time needed to grow. Spiritual growth is intentional. It's not automatic, and we're called then to go with the gospel because we live around people who don't know Jesus. So live on mission for God's glory, for the fame of his name, and do that among your neighbors and to the nations.